Okay, this is going to sound a little funny. I'm going to talk as if there's an audience here so that we can share this with everyone later. My name is Katie, and again, I'm the executive director at Massaro Community Farm. And tonight we're doing a vegetable curry. And the reason why I like this recipe, scooping here, is because like the other recipes we've made, it's very versatile in that you can use a mixture of vegetables that you have on hand. You can do it meat-free or with meat. You can do it low carb or not. There's a lot of flexibility here. It's low cost and it's super healthy. So I like, and it doesn't take that long, believe it or not. So I was just saying before I hit the record button that I already got started by doing two things. Number one is I put my rice on to cook so that, sorry, see my face, right? So that the rice is going to be done right around the same time, about 20 minutes after all of our vegetables are done cooking. And the other thing I did was I took this little mini butternut squash that I gave you all. It's called a honey nut. This is much less susceptible, by the way, to being eaten by critters on the farm. So we've taken to growing a lot more of these in recent years. Very easy for us and it doesn't get attacked. But all I did was cut the top off, cut it in half, put it in the microwave for 5 minutes. It's now soft. Don't even need to peel it if I don't want to, although you can if you wanted to scoop the flesh out. I'm just going to end up cutting this up in cubes and throwing it in with our veggies. So as we were waiting for you all to join us, when I was trying to come up with this recipe, actually, the reason what made me think of this is that a few years ago, I agreed to go for 3 months in the winter and live on a friend's off-grid farm in Hawaii. I don't remember if I've talked about this before or not. But while we were living there, they used to host volunteers on the farm to come and stay for a couple weeks at a time. And they basically work in exchange for room and board. And they didn't feed them all the meals, but they used to stock the pantry with like rice, dried beans, tomato sauce, some really basic ingredients. And so I kept trying to be creative in what I could cook with rice and beans and tomato sauce. So almost once a week, we would have these group community meals. And sometimes I would make chili. You can hide all kinds of things in chili, and it's a great crowd pleaser. And the other thing I would make is because all of the kids who were staying on the farm while we were there were absolutely enamored with coconuts. And they would anywhere and everywhere they went, they were picking coconuts and they would come back and husk the coconuts. And there was always like fresh coconut meat and coconut milk. So I ended up making coconut curry. And I got really good at it. It's super easy. So what I've done so far is I've just got my onions and garlic, which is on the recipe right over here. It's already sauteing and a little bit brown in my pan right next to my, I'm going to take my face off the screen so you guys can actually see what I'm doing now. And that's already brown. So what I'm going to do is I've got the other thing I gave you all is this lovely, now this is broccoli. And I wanted to talk a little bit about organic broccoli. So I'm going to talk as I'm chopping. Growing the broccoli that you see in the grocery store with the really big heads or the flower part of the vegetable takes a lot of intervention. And so most organic farmers are actually not growing that. We grow a broccolini or a flowering broccoli so that you get smaller heads, right? That's the flower part. By the way, totally edible. These will open up and yield a yellow flower. Don't be afraid to eat broccoli if you ever see that on it. You can totally eat that part and the stalk, which most of the time we're used to throwing away. The most densest, nutritious part of the broccoli plant, right? And when they're grown organically, the stalks are often quite sweet. So broccoli doesn't take that much to cook, and sometimes it's better al dente. So I'm just rough chopping these into like 1-inch pieces. And I'm adding these to my garlic and onions. The other thing I like about this recipe is if your kids are really picky vegetable eaters. So I put on the recipe 2 cups of mixed vegetables because I think, again, you can choose what works for your family, what you like. I try to just mix up the colors. So curry is always really beautiful. If you've got a green vegetable and a purple vegetable, it could be purple green beans and a red vegetable, and you're going to have red and then an orange. Traditionally Indian food. Can you guys all hear me okay? My volume good? Okay. Traditionally, Indian food would often include foods that are abundant in India. So cauliflower is a prominent one, potatoes, and tomatoes, of course. So they get the eggplant and the tomatoes, they get the heat-loving crops for sure. But by incorporating different colors, you have both an attractive meal and you've got a real mixture of vitamins and minerals. It's also an easy way to like hide in things that your kids might otherwise not like as much. So one of the things my husband is not crazy about is eggplant. So I'm always trying to find creative ways to use eggplant. And this is one because I can chop it up small and he basically doesn't even know it's in there. And the eggplant that we do grow, so this is an Italian eggplant, but I gave you the Japanese eggplant, which is a smaller, more slender variety. And it also has a lot fewer seeds. And what that means is there's more flesh to it and it's less prone to get mushy when you cook it. So those are really good. If you see those in the grocery store, they cook fast and they're great for stir fries because they kind of retain that firmer texture. So I've got my broccoli in there and I'm just chopping I'll show you this in just 1 second. Down a little bit. I got my broccoli cooking. My rice is close to getting done. And I'm going to add this eggplant now. Tammy, do you eat curry at all?
I do. I love curry.
Yeah. Some people are really turned off by it because they feel like it's a really strong flavor. And I think a lot of folks who cook with curry as a very traditional dish will do things like they often have their own family recipes for curry because people don't realize that curry seasoning is actually a mixture of other things. So it's things like coriander, turmeric, other spices, but the curry powder we have here in America, I'm gonna admit, I'm just using a very simple, basic ShopRite or store-bought brand of basic curry, and it's very refined. That's probably mostly turmeric and which is where it gets its orange color from, and coriander, which are the most prominent flavors. But some of them, if you buy it, get a very traditional curry, it can have lots of other flavors in it. So when you smell families cooking curry, it can have a really, really overpowering flavor, but it doesn't need to be. So some folks are afraid of it because of that. So I've got nice little like 1-inch chunks, see that, of the eggplant. And right now my broccoli is pretty much al dente and the eggplant doesn't take long either. And that's just my timer telling me my rice is done. So I'm going to let those things cook and I'm going to chop my peppers, which I also gave you. And again, I really prefer to have a red pepper because I'm trying to get a mixture of colors here. And by the way, I did give you these wonderful honey nut squash, but carrots is also a great one, which I meant to mention earlier. You often see carrot or zucchini was the thing I meant to mention. That is a heat-loving crop that you often see in a vegetable curry. And if you can't get your kids to eat zucchini, but you can dice it up and put it in curry, it's a great way to get them to eat it. But I love including an orange vegetable because not only does it make it really vibrant, but you also get the really crucial elements of beta carotene. So beta carotene is great for our immune system. It's got a lot of minerals in it. It obviously, it is known to have, although not proven to have, anti-cancer fighting properties. And of course, that old wives' tale about being good for your eyes is that beta carotene has also been shown in labs to actually prevent cataracts. So I guess that's the science part of the carrots being good for your eyes. And by the way, if you ever have a chance, hopefully you guys will get, if you didn't receive last week, you will get this week from the farm, some of our organic carrots. I will have to say that I think that the farm's organic carrots are one of the best, my favorite things about working there. If you're used to eating store-bought carrots, I can't even remember now if we use them in any of our other recipes. Because they're typically a spring or fall crop for us. We don't often do carrots in the summertime because they're longer, slower growing. And sometimes we harvest them in the spring when they've been overwintered. But organic carrots don't have the same bitter skin that you get when you buy a conventionally grown carrot. So you just wash them and eat them. And oftentimes, honestly, I'm like picking them out of the garden, rubbing the dirt off and eating them without even washing them. That's how good they are. I've got a little bit more green here. Put my little pepper in. Again, red pepper is really nice. Red or orange or yellow pepper will add some nice color. So while those are sauteing, I've got this already cooked wonderful honey nut squash. And since it's already cooked, I'm going to add it last. Right. So turn this way. I'm just trying to took a cooking class during the pandemic. And one of the things I always remember is that they try to get you to cut your vegetables even sizes. So that means that things cook evenly and you don't have big pieces that are still hard when the soft pieces are done. The other thing I've really gotten used to ignoring on organic vegetables is things like these, especially on our tomato plants. We're so consumed with like cutting off all the little stem parts. And honestly, when we eat tomatoes from the farm, we just eat the entire thing. By the way, one other flexible thing that you can do with this recipe is if you are making it in the summer, this recipe that I shared actually says to use a can of tomatoes, but there have been lots of times where I have a ton of tomatoes in the summertime. And I don't even use a can of tomatoes. I just cut up a bunch of fresh tomatoes and put them in the pan. Essentially what you're trying to do is create a little bit of a tomato base and then some creaminess to it with either this recipe called for yogurt. If you have a can of coconut milk, then you get that coconut curry and it gets a little bit of sweetness from the coconut milk. Oh, I'm just going to wait another minute or two for this eggplant to finish cooking before I put that in. So if you've got tomatoes from your garden, from the community garden, from a farm share, if you've used your SNAP coupons and it's the middle of the summer and you want to make the most of the potatoes, use them fresh by all means. There is no reason you need to use canned tomatoes in the height of the summer. All right. We did lose our mom. Okay. I'm just going to keep going. The other thing I just wanted to mention, because you all may be getting some of this in your upcoming week's farm shares, which is I've noticed that people always get a little bit overwhelmed with radishes. So number one, we grow a variety of root vegetables that look like this. Some of them are beets, some are radishes, some are turnips. And the turnips are more mild than the radish, but radishes can have a huge variation in flavor profile. And people get overwhelmed because they're like, I don't eat radishes. They give me indigestion eating them raw. I get a ton of radishes from the farm. They're really high in vitamin C and fiber. So I was getting a lot of them a couple of years ago and I didn't know what to do with them. And I just started adding them to my cooked foods. And most people don't think of cooking radishes, but this is another thing that you can hide in there if you've got it from a farm share or anywhere else that you don't know what to do with it and your kids are not eating radishes. Chop them up and add them to anything else that you're cooking. They get really mellow and even sweet. You can do a roasted roots with like potatoes, carrots, and radishes on a tray in the oven. Super easy. If I didn't have something else with color to put in today, I was going to add these, but since we've got the wonderful green and the purple of the eggplant and the orange of the honey nut, I'm going to leave them out. But I love to add radishes to stir fry, just plain kale. Yeah, almost anything. If I'm doing anything that has more than one vegetable in it, I'll throw in a radish. And then by the end of the week, I've used up my radishes. So nice way to use them up and get your kids eating them and get that health benefit. All right. So we're getting close to bringing this all together now. I suggested in this recipe fire roasted tomatoes because typically curries do have a little element of heat. You can either use a hotter pepper. So I used sweet peppers because that's what we had. Or you can add a dash of cayenne, or you can use something where the diced tomatoes have a little bit of that heat in them. Totally individual and entirely up to you. So I'm gonna add a dash of cayenne right at the end, but I've just got a plain can of diced tomatoes here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add this and my cooked honey nut squash at the same time and let that warm through and add my curry seeds, my salt, pepper, and curry. So far, the only things I've put in the pan are the onions and garlic. And then let me do that. By the way, even in a pinch, you don't have roasted tomatoes and you have a nice thick tomato sauce, use that. I mean, I tend to not do that just because marinara sauce has its own like Italian sauce generally has its own seasoning, which is not complementary to this, but you can do it because the curry and the other flavors generally will overpower that. Fresh tomatoes, plain fresh tomatoes. Trying to think what else might substitute, but maybe a red salsa that has cilantro in it. This is generally curry is often topped with cilantro as an ending. That jar of tomatoes was a little bit less than I wanted. I'm gonna add a little bit more of my own fresh tomatoes here and a little bit of water to make some sauce. Half a cup of water. And now my rice is just about done, so I'm going to turn that off. So I've got this on a medium to low burner because most of the vegetables are cooked at this point. And I really just want to rewarm the squash and the tomato sauce through. And you'll see in this recipe that it calls for yogurt. Another substitution you can make is if you have like a can of coconut milk or plant-based milk you want to put in, you're really just trying to add a creaminess to that tomato sauce. And you don't want to add that while you're cooking it because you don't want to cook the milk. So that's something that you're going to add right at the end. So I'm going to do about a half a teaspoon of salt and about a quarter teaspoon of pepper. I just want to show you all. I love cooking for you. I think everything I've made has been in this, like, I've got like this giant wok. Show you guys. You see that there? That's my big wok. One pot meals, right? And my curry. And you want about 2 tablespoons. It sounds like a lot. If you're a little bit nervous about that, you can put less and taste it. Now I smell the curry. My husband's gonna love this tonight. I just want to check one thing. Oh yeah, so I also did mention, and I do have here. So I said earlier on, you can certainly do, obviously, if you go out to a restaurant and order curry, you can get curry with all kinds of meat, pepper. But I like to offer lots of people alternatives, not only because we have lots of vegetarians or people with food sensitivities, but also meat is really expensive right now. And I know we're trying to feed our families, and beans are a really good source of protein. So it doesn't mean we have to do this every night, but boy, are we saving a lot. So dried beans, even better, but 1 to 2 cans of chickpeas, depending on the size of the family, with this pot of vegetables and rice makes this a super hearty and filling meal. Again, I just had a little bit of each vegetable, so a little bit goes a long way. When I needed food support when my kids were little. They told me because I had a full-time job making more than minimum wage that I didn't qualify for food stamps. And my problem was I was paying all my bills, and at the end of every 2-week period, I would hardly have anything left for groceries. It was so frustrating. They wouldn't even approve me for food stamps. And the food pantries at that time were only really serving homeless people. They weren't serving families the way we are now, like all of these added benefits. So I'm always trying to think of how I used to serve my family and feed them stuff and still try to achieve that balance of, like, you want them to have a starch and vegetables and fruits and proteins, which they all need, as we know, to grow. All right. So it smells really fragrant now. It's warmed through. And wow, it almost smells like cinnamony. And even though I didn't put that in there, I catch like a hint of cinnamon. So I've got a can of chickpeas, which I'm gonna add. And then I'm gonna turn off the heat, and while it's warm, I'm just gonna add maybe a half a cup to a cup. And this is actually coconut yogurt. So I talked about coconut milk. I try to avoid dairy. So this is coconut yogurt. And again, to taste, it can really be, this is just meant to add, if you have an oat milk or soy milk or something, you're really just trying to add a little bit of creaminess to the tomato sauce. What are we doing on time? Good. I've got it on low. I want the chickpeas to get warm. I'm gonna add I got myself this wonderful new tool. My dad used to cook with one of these. It's like a wooden spoon, but it's a spatula. I don't know why that seems so novel to me, but I got this a few months ago and I just love cooking with it. And it doesn't harm my scratch-free pans. I'm going to show you this in just 1 second. Now, if you're adding any kind of, you know, this element of creaminess, anything other than coconut milk, I cheat a little bit because the coconut has a natural sweetness. I'm just going to add maybe 2 teaspoons of sugar, and I'm just doing this. And what happens when you have food that has a little bit of heat in it, the sugar, this size pan, I'm only doing maybe 1/8 of a teaspoon. This is the tiniest little sprinkle of cayenne pepper, because I didn't use a hot pepper to cook with, and I didn't use fire roasted tomatoes. So the blend of the sweetness with the heat, they kind of balance each other and offset each other. And I'm just gonna mix those in. Those are totally optional, by the way. It's just something I do. But if you've cooked with fire roasted tomatoes, if you've made your recipe, or you've added a jalapeno pepper or any other hot pepper, this just kind of balances out that flavor. And you get like the sweet taste of almost like a coconut curry. All right. And we are just about ready. So this took us maybe 20 or 22 minutes. Can you all see that? I can bring it closer. My rice is ready. Let me put it in a dish so you can get a nice close-up view of it.
It looks delicious.
And there's probably, so I've got a full bowl here, and there's probably at least 5 servings in that pan. So it's a nice family meal. So traditional folks will often top this. I have some dried cilantro, but I also have some fresh cilantro out in the garden. So a topping of cilantro and that lemony, citrusy flavor on top of the creamy tomato flavors is a really, it's almost like putting cilantro on your Mexican food. If you have it and you want to use it, that's like a nice topper. So let me just make sure I turned everything off. Forget anything, burn anything. And there we have it. So that's our quick curry. Super easy. Hopefully, people enjoy that. I'd love feedback. And those of you who are getting produce will continue to get produce from the farm, I think, for another several weeks. And typically the types of things that we feature this time of year are the hardy greens that when exposed to cold weather, they get sweeter and less bitter. So that's things like chard and more kale and maybe spinach and different other greens that kind of cross over between a lettuce green and a cooking green. Root crops, so certainly more carrots, more potatoes, more, what did I say? Radishes and different types of radishes. More winter squash, which we may get from a partner farm. And if you don't have chickpeas, you can always substitute potatoes in your curry as well. I have those out here as well. So I'd love to hear if people have any desires or wants for things that they might want to see with this last round of crops that we're going to have and doing another cooking demo before we're all done for the season. But I'm not shy about sharing. So I'm also happy to come up with something. I'm just really curious if anybody has any requests for types of things that their kids like to eat or don't like to eat, and anything like that. So I guess that's about it. We're ready, and I'm gonna go enjoy some dinner.
Thanks so much, Katie. Have a good night.
All right, thanks everyone.